Wolves are reportedly interested in Nantes striker Matthis Abline. Now, I'm going to be speaking in this video why I think he'll be perfect for Wolves, why I think Wolves are looking at him, and the things that I love about Abline himself in his overall play. So let's get straight into this one. Now, one of the first things I want to highlight is this. This is the total successful attacking actions for under-23 players across Europe in the top 7 leagues. And look at the company that Abline here finds himself within. He's had more successful attacking actions than the likes of Liam Delap, João Pedro, and Cali Muendo, who's had a really promising sort of few years at Stade Rennais, really, and it's a player that a lot of people in France have got highly touted to go on to have a great career. However, if you look here as well, Benjamin Sesko is also in there, and Abline has 29 more successful attacking actions than the likes of Benjamin Sesko, who Manchester United have, of course, just signed for a very high fee. Now, for me, Abline is one of these players that's almost a diamond in the rough because, you know, Nantes aren't particularly unbelievable as a side, but I think for me, he's got all the attributes to go on to have an unbelievable career. And in this Wolves side, there are a few places that I could see him really slotting in, and I think he would be an absolutely brilliant addition. So let's speak a bit about that. Now, as you can see here, Matthis Abline's scouting report is really not unbelievable when you look at it. I'm very well aware that it does look extremely underwhelming in the attacking areas. However, this is basically, you know, a lot of people have profiled him as a 9, and he isn't an out-and-out 9. He's played off the right 8 times, I think, this season. He's played off the left as well, I think, once. And then, obviously, he's played through the middle at times as well, you know, predominantly through the middle. But he's not an out-and-out 9. He's more of a creator, a ball progressor, and someone that wants to get his team up the pitch. And playing for Nantes, that is mainly his objective. Get the ball up the pitch, give it to the likes of Moses Simon, for example, off the left. And generally, that's been his game for Nantes this season. He did similar when he did come through at Stade Rennais as well. Now, as you can see here, he's in the top 11% for progressive carries, which is just ludicrous. 2.44 per 90, which is incredible. And bringing the ball forward is something that I think Wolves are going to struggle with, having lost Nelson Semedo. And I think that's not really for Lopez's game. He's not the player that's going to get you up the pitch. He's not particularly quick. He's not particularly strong. But this is where I think Matthis Abline does come in for Wolves next season. Now, as you can see here as well, 1.14 successful take-ons per 90, putting him in the top 15%, which is just absolutely brilliant. And then this one as well, 1.17 clearances. And I know that sounds crazy that we're even considering that for forwards. But if we just take a look at his heat map from last season in Ligue 1, as you can see here, he is all action. He is completely all action here. It's absolutely brilliant. It's a brilliant heat map to see for those teams that are in and around the sort of the struggling ones, perhaps your West Hams and your Wolves and your Brentfords and the teams that you think are going to struggle this season. Players like him are worth their weight in gold because, as you can see here, he's so comfortable in every area, and he doesn't have one area that he particularly dominates. He has a lot of areas where he just gets the ball, gets it into that area, gives it to other players, and also isn't afraid to get into the box and make things happen as well. So for me, I think he'd slot in perfectly for this Wolves side. The only query is where would he play? Like I said, he's played off the left at times. He's played as a number 9. But are they going to sign, you know, it's reported around 25 to 30 million pounds, I reckon he'll cost. Now, if he costs in and around that fee, I think it's a big risk to say to Jørgen Strand Larsen, look, you know, we're bringing him in, and ultimately he's cost more than Larsen by that point, and then there's a sort of battle going on. But I do equally think he could play off the right, but then it makes it difficult for Fer Lopez. Although I wouldn't be surprised if Wolves went to a 3 in midfield and he was more of an advanced midfielder. But we'll speak about that in another video, I'm sure. I do think Abline would be a really good signing. And I know people have seen the 50 million euros reported fee, but that, I'm certain, is just for French clubs to basically say, no, you're not having him. We don't want to sell within our league. I'm pretty certain that's what is going on there, really. And I think if, you know, clubs from abroad, like Wolves, like Eintracht Frankfurt, that are linked to him, if they went in and went, do you know what, we want 30 million, 35 at a push, I think they'd absolutely take it. So I think that's another thing to consider when speaking about Matthis Abline. As you can see, he had 11 goals and 2 assists in all competitions last season, which might seem a bit underwhelming, but I think there's so many clubs, and the clubs that are interested in him are interested in him for a reason, because he's one of those players that just feels like, although he's currently perhaps underperforming what you might expect of a player of his quality and his value, I think he's one of them that could go to that next level, hence why Eintracht Frankfurt are so heavily linked to him, because that is the best place for these young strikers to develop. We've seen it with Andre Silva, Hugo Ekitike, Luka Jovic. You know, we've seen it with numerous players at Eintracht Frankfurt, Omar Marmoush as well. There's so many players that go there and thrive. So for me, if Eintracht Frankfurt are, you know, interested, that obviously makes it more difficult for Wolves, of course. But if Frankfurt are interested, then I think, Wolves again are shopping in the right markets, as I've briefly said, with Juan Luis Sanchez, Mark Pubier, Samuel Lino, all players that they've ultimately missed out on, but they're absolutely brilliant profiles and clearly have some quality to be seen sort of the clubs that they are linked to. Now, as you said briefly, there's, positions he's played off the left. He's, as I said, one game. Played off the right and as a centre forward. You could also potentially see him playing alongside Larson, which I think is another interesting one. I think he wins about 2.07 aerials per 90 as well. So my biggest criticism against Celta Vigo was that Larson wasn't winning enough in the air. So again, I think Abline offers that despite being shorter than Larson. And I do think that's another thing to consider with the reason that Wolves are probably in for him, to be quite honest. Now, let's say that this is Wolves' lineup next season when everyone's fit, as it stands. Obviously, we don't know who the right wing-back will be. You would think that would get added to. But let's say this is Wolves' best 11 next season, with Mosquera in there. Doherty, as you can see, is on the bench. But let's just say that is the 11 for now. Where would Abline fit in this side? Now, there's a few ways I think you could operate this. I think, as I've said, there will be a possibility where if Abline did come in, you could almost have that. Obviously, when Wolves had Lamina, it was similar to sort of this, really. And then Lamina was obviously sitting in there. But I do think you could sort of operate in that formation, really, in terms of in games. I think you could potentially do that and then allow perhaps a 2 with Abline in there instead of Arias, or Abline alongside Strand Larson, or maybe even Arias in there as well. It just feels like a very weird signing in terms of how is he going to fit in this side. But I wanted to sort of break that down, really. Now, Wolfer is one of these players that's going to be up here very, very high, as we saw yesterday against Celta Vigo. He wants to get nice and high up the pitch. And AZ Alkmaar, he was very much the same. That was where his position was. So we're going to see him bombing on a lot. Now, Arias, as I've said, wants to get into these areas. He's an inside forward. He wants to cut in. He wants to get his shot off. So that makes it really interesting. Where would Abline play? As I've said, I think they could potentially be looking at Fer Lopez as a player who might not be ready yet. And we could potentially see this. Obviously, let's just move him back there. We could potentially see Abline off the right-hand side with Strand Larson up there and Arias as well. And Abline is one of these players that could cut in. He could get into the box. He could make things happen. He underperformed his XG with regards to, his expected assists, he underperformed his expected assists last season. I think he had 2 assists in the end, and his expected assist was around 3.4, so he did underperform there. And I think that's one thing that was my criticisms of this Wolves side at the moment, is they're not creating anywhere near enough. And I think Abline gives you that with his dribbling, with his progressive carries, with his, sort of ability to get into the right areas, to get into the box, his will to run at players, take players on. That's something that I think Wolves have been lacking, and I think Abline would bring that, massively, to be honest, next season. The other alternative you do have is, of course, those games when perhaps Strand Larson isn't on it, or, he hasn't been on it really all pre-season, so maybe you have them games where you want a different option up there, and Abline does provide that. He's more of a dribbler, he's more technical, he wants to be on the ball more than Strand Larson. Strand Larson's one of these players that wants to, get the ball and give it and sort of, get into the right areas. But Abline is one of these players that brings everyone else into play whilst also creating a lot himself and organically as well. So I do think that's another option massively for Wolves. And then equally, there'll be games where I'm sure Arias has played a hell of a lot of football and you might want to go, do you know what? Abline off the right, Abline off the left, Lopez off the right, Strand Larson through the middle. There will be times when that's an option as well. And as I've said, with his ability to get into the box, to get into the right areas and take players on, I wouldn't be surprised in situ, really. Say, for example, Lopez has the ball in these areas. I would not be surprised whatsoever if he was to get the ball and he wanted to put it in these areas and it would go to Strand Larson, or it would be floated to the back post and Abline's running in there onto the ball. I think there's loads of possibilities, especially with Lopez picking up the ball around here. So I do think, again, it's really interesting. He could pick the ball up around there. And then I think you've got a real option for Lopez to get in here, put it to the back post with Abline to cause a bit of havoc. As I said, he's very good in the air. 2.07 aerials, 1 per 90 as well. So I do think there's a lot of ways that Abline could fit this Wolves side. And I do think he's definitely one of these players that, as we've said, Wolves need forward depth. And there are a lot of players leaving. I think Hwang will still leave this summer. I think Sasa Kalajic will probably potentially be leaving this summer. And Fabio Silva is, of course, yet to go, as well as losing Gonzalo Guedes. So they do need an option that can play multiple positions. As I briefly said in my Amin Adli video as well, he's one of them players for me that can play multiple positions, and I think he'll be a very useful asset for Wolves. Doesn't look like it's going to happen now, but again, as I've said, that type of profile, Georgios Mikotadze as well. Another player, the Georgian player that Wolves have been linked to for a long time. Again, can play the 10, can play the 9, very comfortable in possession. And Abline almost fits that role, really. And I do think he'd be a real useful asset for Wolves if they were to bring him in ahead of this season coming up. Now, if you did enjoy this video, I would really appreciate it if you would like it, comment what you thought about the video, what you think about Abline as a player as well. And more importantly, subscribe to the channel because we are trying to reach 2,000 subscribers before the start of the 2025-26 Premier League season. It is going to be a task given the fact that we've got 5 days to do it, but I believe in you all. I'm sure we can do it and hopefully get it over the line because it would mean the absolute world to me. Thank you very much for watching this video and I'll see you all in the next one.